Welcome everyone to David Gallardo's Book Dreamer YouTube page. On this week's installment, I'm actually in a nice foresty setting because I'm going to be talking about fantasy works. Now, this is my first fantasy novel, Clockmaker, which was published in 2020. And it is an experimental kind of book. Normally, I do a lot of science fiction, though I do have another fantasy book that's in editing right now, and I'm starting a third. So there's more fantasy coming into play as I continue my writing career. But I'm still sticking with the science fiction for my usual gig. With Clockmaker, I decided to do an experiment or two with the genre of fantasy. In keeping with the theme of David Gallardo Book Dreamer, it is based on dreams, although unlike Crew of Ganges, it is not a single dream. It's kind of ironic, really. Crew of Ganges is huge. It's a big, thick, heavy book based on a single dream, whereas this one is based on several dreams stitched together. It's a much smaller book, though I've heard it is very enjoyable, and a lot of people have written to me and contacted me saying how much they have really liked the book, and one person went so far as to saying it had the best ending they had ever read. I'll take that. That's an amazing compliment, and thank you, thank you. Uh, Clockmaker is an experiment in another way as well. I like fantasy. Maybe not quite as much as science fiction, but I do like my fantasy. I have found fantasy is very focused still on humans, elves, dwarves, and other mythological creatures and characters from our own legends. And I wanted to do something completely different. I wanted to really change some of the rules when it comes to fantasy. I guess in some ways this makes me a little more aligned with Lewis Carroll, where his characters are strange to the point of the fact that most of them are not hominids. This is true with Clockmaker as well. Uh, Clockmaker himself is indeed a humanoid character, but he is not human. The other characters in the book, most of them are nothing like human beings. So it has been a real shift in focus and in being able to surprise the reader and make them think a little bit more outside the box when it comes to fantasy. I wanted the companions of Clockmaker, because he does gain a couple of companions in his adventures. I wanted them to be so outlandish and so different. There was one reader who came up to me directly and said that he had read my book twice just so that he could really get all the details from it. And I like that. If someone's willing to reread your book just to tease out all the bits and pieces, that's a good sign. Clockmaker begins in the world of Everpath. Everpath is a foresty world, although it is not a planet. This world is in some ways tube-shaped. The entire universe of Everpath is no more than 500 meters wide, which, is half a kilometer. And it is infinitely long. It has a single road that runs down the middle of it. And on either side of the road is mostly forest, although every now and then you have a home. And that home has a creator, someone who makes something. You might have a metalsmith in one or a baker in another, and then you have Clockmaker. And he spends his time making clocks and, setting dinner for himself. It's a very lonely but satisfying little existence. He was born in his hearth knowing how to make clocks automatically, has no idea what education is. It's just the way things are. And of course, his name is his task. He has a loading dock outside his front door. It's like a really big porch. And that porch is where he puts all of his finished clocks and waits for the roadmen who have these huge wagons. They come down the road, pick up his clocks, and give him materials to make new ones, plus things that he needs, like foods and soap and, maybe a fresh shirt or something, if something got stained or torn. And they exchange. And then they move on down to the next home. Now here's an odd bit with Everpath. Everyone goes down the road. No one goes up the road. Going up the road can lead to being dizzy, disoriented, severe vertigo. So people don't really walk up the road except for a very short period of time, like 10, 20 feet, and that's it. And then, no. So Clockmaker has never seen the same person twice, ever in his life. He doesn't know what happened to the former Clockmaker, and nor does he know how long he's going to be around. It's all a mystery to him. The forest that surrounds his home is filled with shadows, and at night the shadows come out and they run around the road, and to keep them at bay are lanterns that are hung on huge posts all down the road, and lamplighters with special swords and with a big lantern and a wick on a long pole will light the lanterns before the day is over. And then in the morning they will come and they will snuff the lanterns out, and they constantly walk the road of Everpath. This is the world of Clockmaker. This is where he begins. This is where he belongs. This is where he was born. The tale actually begins with him being threatened by one of the shadows while he's gathering wood. And the shadow says he's going to eat him. Now, Clockmaker gets very frightened by this and runs back in his house, but the shadow won't leave him alone. He's stalking him. He's constantly going after him and saying how he's going to eat him alive. So Clockmaker does the one thing he can think of to do, and that is to get away. So he packs up his best belongings, gets everything else, and puts it at the head of his house and waits for the roadmen. And then he convinces them to take him on as a passenger and goes down the road. He meets his first town. He's never seen a town and gets quite sick when he sees his first crossroad. He loses it. Just too much for him. Too much. Too many paths. Too many walkways. No, they crisscross. No, this is, wow. Everything's got to be one way. Towns are a little strange. They're not wider than the world, but they push the forest of the world back a bit. When they leave their first town, there is a terrible storm, and Clockmaker is thrown from the wagon of the roadmen and falls through the walls of the world. He then finds himself in a completely different realm that has radically different rules and very, very strange creatures that inhabit it, including one named Huntress. And this, we now see the beginning of the lack of hominids. Huntress is not human. Huntress might be considered barely humanoid, but she is not a human being or anything that is like a human. If anything, she's more like a cat, snake, creature with fluffy ears and too many limbs and two tails, and she hunts, and she hunts with a bow and arrow, and she makes mushroom arrows that are very sharp and very hard. I'll leave you to read the book to figure that out. But there's a lot of magic in her world. She sings things into being. She sings things so that they respond in a certain way to her will. And this she carries on. He wants to get home. He is desperate to get back to Everpath and find his way home. And she agrees to help him. And thus begins the tale. The problem is the shadow has followed him and is hunting him throughout a variety of worlds that get stranger and stranger and stranger as we go on. All of those worlds that Clockmaker travels through are separate dreams of mine, but they're not just a dream I had and thought was interesting. They're recurring dreams. These were dreams that happen to me often. And I'll take the example of Everpath because I don't really want to put a lot of spoilers here. Everpath I have seen in dreams many times, sometimes in winter, sometimes in the autumn, sometimes in summer. It's always the same little house. It's always the same road with the big lanterns. I have sometimes seen the roadmen or the lantern uh, people and, just accepted them as part of the norm. It was always a very quiet place with a light song to the day. Instead of a sun, things get bright and there's a bright blue sky, but there's no sun in the sky. And there's a song, and they call it the song of day, and then there's the song of night. And yeah, there's more of a mournful sound at night, and there's a very cheerful kind of harmonies that are audible during the day. And this has been consistent with every dream that I have had about Everpath. So I decided to use this as my launching point. And what I did was I picked dream realms that I have experienced more than once, places that I have visited multiple times when I sleep. Don't know. Maybe my mind is trying to tell me something. Maybe not. But in any case, these are places I have revisited over and over again and linked them together with Clockmaker's journey. And his journey is not just a physical journey of trying to get home. He's trying to figure out, who is he if he's not making clocks? Who is he if he is not in Everpath? What kind of being is he? And he doesn't have a ready answer to these questions because unlike us, his identity is nailed to his name, which is nailed to what he does in the realm of Everpath. That has been stripped from him. And he is now tabula rasa and doesn't know how to handle it. And this is the psychological story behind the fantasy adventure. Fantasy is very good at that. It really does give you a lot of venues and a lot of ways of telling a tale that is more about what's happening inside the character as a reflection of our own struggles as sentient beings. It's a little harder to do that with science fiction because there are certain avenues you can't explore because they don't make much sense. But in fantasy, making sense is the least of your worries. You have to be able to get the reader to be able to understand the world that they're in, and they have to be able to understand the main characters in order to get the gist of the story. But the actual settings and the things that happen are fantastical. They don't have to have a scientific explanation. There's no need for that. So Clockmaker was a real adventure for me. Crew of Ganges I consider more of a hard science fiction novel. This is a gallop through wild imagination, unfettered by facts. And that was a real challenge for me, and I enjoyed every moment that I spent writing and editing and preparing Clockmaker for publication. And I want to thank everyone who picked it up. It seems Clockmaker has become popular, which I'm really pleased about. This is one of the first books that snapped up from my table when I do the book signings. And it is beginning to gain a little traction on Amazon as well, which is my main distributor online. So if you want, pick up a copy of Clockmaker. It's not too expensive. It's available in ebook and in print. I am going to be working on the audio book for it as soon as I'm done with Crew of Ganges. So one at a time, one at a time. That's the goal there. I got to do one at a time when it comes to making the audiobooks, which reminds me, that's what I got to get busy doing now. I want to thank you for being here. Please spread the word and please subscribe and comment. I would love to hear what you have to say. If you've read Clockmaker, I want to know what you thought of it. Good or bad. I take criticism. I really do, especially if it's a critique, because, that I can really work with. Just saying, oh, it was terrible or it was great, that doesn't help me as much. But saying why it was wonderful or why you didn't like it, that really helps me tremendously. So I want to thank you all very much, and I hope you have a wonderful day. Take care.